Gnishli Keshtene, a Tosnu Russian Kate Kesht on Chachta, Mary Lou McDonald at all.
Gurmagat Count Corla. So last night we have seen once again, we have witnessed the most harrowing scenes emanating from Ukraine. We've seen the bewildered faces on children, on civilian populations fleeing for their safety and indeed for their lives, spending night after night now huddled in air raid shelter, scenes that, Count Corla, we never dreamed that we would live to witness again on our continent. So our thoughts are with the people of Ukraine, with those who have left, who have fled, and indeed with those who have travelled to Ukraine, including from here in Ireland, and we've heard their harrowing testament also. Count Corla ne féidir le aine will mass agin an Saoirse agus an féin cinenne ach brathnú le húfás an gníomhartha na Rúise. Seasamid leis an Ucrán agus tugamid or daciacht dóibh a ríis. The ongoing violation of Ukrainian sovereignty and their internationally recognised borders is an affront to the principles we hold dear as members of the international community. And I want to take the opportunity today to commend the work of Irish diplomatic staff, of NGO personnel who are on the ground in Ukraine, in Eastern Europe, carrying out hugely important work, assisting those caught up in the conflict in this nightmare and distributing humanitarian support and aid. This is vital work, and I want to commend everyone equally engaged in collecting aid here in Ireland to assist the humanitarian response. Taoiseach, you have set out the initial contribution of the Irish government to the humanitarian effort. This is the time we all agreed that we all need to stretch ourselves. So can you set out for us what else the government proposes to do, how Ireland might step up our efforts and supports for these humanitarian endeavours? Later this afternoon, I will meet with the Ukrainian ambassador to assure her of our continued support, of our unwavering commitment to see peace in her homeland. And I want to welcome the overwhelming support of the European Parliament yesterday for a resolution condemning Russia's actions, and I hope that here in the Dáil this evening we will equally, on a cross-party basis, support the motion before us. Taoiseach, our diplomatic response to Russia's actions must be firm, it must be sure-footed, and it must be consistent, and our objective is to end the war. We need to play our full part in that. I believe that our military neutrality, our history of conflict resolution, and our seat on the UN Security Council mean that we are strongly placed to advance these efforts for that peaceful pathway forward. Diplomacy must ultimately prevail. Every diplomatic avenue must be used to end the war. All diplomatic leverage must be employed. It's clear that the actions of Russia in Ukraine are abhorrent, and to that end I want to ask you about the expulsion of the Russian ambassador to Ireland. This is something that thus far, an action that you have not taken. You have advanced the case of working in concert with our European partners. I happen to believe, Taoiseach, that now is the time for our government, for you as head of government, to take the lead on this issue. So I want to ask you, please, have you raised this matter with your fellow EU leaders? Have you put a proposal to them? And can you agree that it is now time to pursue this course of action?
Cretan made a talk Tarlus and Ukraine, August is Ufasa Gunskele, Ganaudus, August Unsi Mead Lahach, Gan Rezun, Tafi Capital, Egan Rush, Assault Gunskele, or Fadagus Tom Winton, a Tirishaw, Gwynne, Anunsi Shaw Gohamlan. We're less than a week into this horrific war against the Ukrainian people. And I think President Putin has not achieved the rapid victory over the Ukrainian people that he anticipated. And more importantly, it's very clear from the resistance of the Ukrainian people how dear they value their freedom, their sovereignty, their territorial integrity. And there's not a scintilla of evidence that there's any response from any Ukrainian citizens that is embracing the Russian invasion as President Putin would have advocated with his troops and so forth. And the courage and resilience of the Ukrainian people is resonating across the globe. And I spoke last evening to the Ukrainian Prime Minister, Denise Shmyhal, who thanked Ireland for our support, our political support, our economic support, our humanitarian support, along with our European Union colleagues. He did say that the situation was extremely difficult on the ground in terms of the killing, indiscriminate killing of children and of women. Shocking what was going on, the levelling of cities. It's very clear now that President Putin is moving into a new phase where you're witnessing extreme forms of barbarity in terms of barbaric attacks on cities, on civilian targets, levelling cities, and it's quite horrific and extraordinary trauma now being visited upon the people of Ukraine. And we have to do everything we possibly can to support them. The use of cluster munitions, for example, something that we as a country had taken a leading role in creating an international treaty to ban the use of cluster munitions in conflict being used in the Ukraine. About 700,000 people, it's estimated, have already left Ukraine, and the numbers could grow dramatically and very significantly. And I think we should expect those numbers to increase. And that will create huge challenges across the European continent, because the repercussions of this war that's been waged by Putin is going to be felt across the length and breadth of our continent. And the human trauma will be enormous. And I think and I'm presuming on the basis, working on the basis that it's on a scale that we've never experienced before. And that we as a country have to now get our heads around that and start preparing in relation to the humanitarian responses that potentially will be required to deal with the scale of migration caused by the war itself. But I think the Irish people will do the right thing. We will not be found wanting in relation to our humanitarian response. In relation to diplomacy, we're absolutely working with our European Union colleagues in respect of that. First of all, in terms of seeking a peaceful resolution of the issues. And to be fair to all the European leaders, particularly the French presidency and Emmanuel Macron, did everything he possibly could to avert this war. Chancellor Scholz likewise, and I would have met with Chancellor Scholz last week in respect of his engagements with President Putin and his endeavours to resolve this. In terms of diplomatic channels and expulsions, that's the easy bit. It is our view that across Europe we work in consort with our European Union colleagues. I've been absolutely passionate about this, that our unity is our strength. It's easy to sort of say, look, I'm going to lead ahead of others. I actually think the most effective route, if I could, it's very important that I make this point genuinely, in the face of a war that we're facing, that's on our continent, that the European Union working together as a unified body with the United States and Canada packs a powerful punch. We have seen that in terms of the sanctions that have been agreed, and we were very clear at the EU Council meeting. We wanted the widest set of sanctions. We want to protect Irish citizens. We want to maintain diplomatic channels to protect Irish citizens, both in Ukraine and in Russia and elsewhere. And it's important that we bear that in mind before taking precipitate action on the front of expulsions, which can be done in a day. It's very easy, but the repercussions could be much longer felt by Irish citizens. That's the challenge.
Deputy McDonald.
Thank you, Taoiseach. And nobody, certainly no Irish person will underestimate for a second the absolute determination and courage of the Ukrainian people to defend their homeland, to defend their families, to defend their lives. Nobody for a moment underestimates the barbarity of Vladimir Putin's regime and the illegality of this invasion of Ukraine, and neither should any of us doubt the absolute necessity to reassert the primacy of international law, of rules-based international relationships, and above all else, the need to restore good order, a full withdrawal of Russian troops, and peace. That this war ends. And it is in that spirit, Taoiseach, that I say to you, and I invite you as head of the Irish government to lead again, to lead together with our partners in Europe, and to leverage this crucial diplomatic tool. It is essential, as shells rain down on Kyiv, as people flee for their lives, that we demonstrate in every way to the Russian Federation that Ireland means business, and that we will not offer any shelter, any excuse, any cover in any form to them. And I say in that spirit, Taoiseach, I invite you again to lead our European partners in this endeavour. And to make this point, as regards keeping diplomatic channels open, and that is a legitimate point that you make, Taoiseach, there are ways in which that can be achieved by the appointment of a charge d'affaires, for example, to ensure that our citizens in Russia or in elsewhere are catered for. But I invite you to lead, not to break ranks with Europe, but to lead on this matter.
Don't overestimate the diplomatic leverage that you've just alluded to in terms of expulsion of any diplomat. We've expelled diplomats in the past. You would not have found favour with that in the past, as you know, and you took a view that it was contrary to military neutrality at the time, in the teeth of Russian aggression. I would readily acknowledge that when that happens, there's a reciprocal response, and you end up with nobody on the ground, particularly in Moscow, where we do have Irish citizens. And I don't know how this war is going to unfold or what implications it will have for citizens, Irish citizens. I do know that right now in Ukraine, we're working extremely hard to help Irish citizens get out. And in particular, very vulnerable young and babies and so on in hospitals in the Ukraine. I'm not going to cut off channels that potentially can help us to get Irish citizens who are in difficulty out of Ukraine, or indeed anywhere else for that matter. Equally, we have discussed everything with our European colleagues, both diplomatic issues like that. Minister Coveney has discussed it at foreign ministers level. We've discussed it at Coreper level. We discuss it at heads of state level. I really believe that the centrality or the importance of we working in unison trumps any domestic political consideration of I being able to say, oh, I'm leading ahead of the rest. I genuinely believe I have no interest in doing that. I actually think in the teeth of the worst war on our continent, the best response is a unified response from the European Union working with the United States. That is the best response. Genuinely, I'm saying to you. It's not about one taking a lead over the other. I just don't think that's the right way to go. It might play well domestically in the short term. It's not in the best interest of the Irish citizens, I think.